Ms. Hogan here, and in this video we're going to talk about the quadratic functions graph. So in order to discuss this, we first have to make sure that you're aware that there are two forms that your quadratic function could be in. The first is sometimes called standard form, and that's what we typically see quadratics in, and that's f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And when I say typically see it in that form, this is the form that you would factor. This is the form that you would solve using the quadratic formula. So this is what we typically see quadratics in. There is another form, though, that can be obtained by completing the square. That is called vertex form. And that's f of x is equal to a parentheses x minus h squared plus k. And if you see this form, there's good news, because we call it vertex form because you can simply pull out the vertex. So what is vertex? Well, that's what this section is all about. And it's the main point that the graph of the quadratic has. So graphs of a quadratic, there's a word. May or may not have seen it before, but it's called parabola. And this is just simply the shape that you're about to see. A parabola can look like this, like a capital U, where the ends are going up, or it could be turned upside down, kind of like a valley or a mountain. Both of those are the shape that you would get for any equation in one of these forms. So all quadratics have a parabola shape. Now, what is vertex? Back to that question. That is the point that is either at the bottom, which we call a minimum vertex, or at the top, which we call a maximum vertex. The vertex can take on a minimum if you have this shape, or a maximum if you have this shape. Now, why am I calling it minimum or maximum? Well, if you look at that graph, that is the smallest point on that graph, minimum. And here is the largest, so maximum. But what is vertex? It's simply the turning point of the parabola. So, as I stated, you're going to be asked to find the vertex, and identifying which form you have will tell you how to find the vertex. Depending on which form you have, you may be able to simply pull it out, or maybe have to do a little work. So let's start with the one that you can simply pull it out. In this vertex form, H and K give you your vertex, but take note that there's a minus in front of that H. So if you had a number like -2, we've got to think about what that minus means. So I like to write that the vertex is opposite H. Okay. Opposite of what you see, same as what you see. That's what that negative does. What it truly represents, though, is a horizontal shift of this graph, which goes the opposite direction than what you see. So if y'all wanted an example of that, if I gave you the equation, f of x equals -2 parentheses x plus 3 squared minus 5. And then I asked you, what is the vertex? Opposite H, K. What number is with x is your H, but we want to do opposite. So opposite of +3 would be -3. And then K, the way it stands, -5. And that tells me that that vertex point, that either minimum or maximum point of this graph, is at -3, -5. So that leads me to one more thing. How do we know if it is a minimum or a maximum? Well, just by looking at this form, we can predict that. So let's add another note down here. We have this one where the ends go up or opens up if your A value is positive. Sometimes you'll see that written as A greater than 0. Simply means positive. And we have this shape if your a value is negative or a less than 0. What is a? Well, go back up here. Both of these forms have an a. It's your leading coefficient. So right there tells me if it's this graph or if it's this graph, by if that number is positive or negative. So let's go back to our example. Up here we have a -2. Negative a. That's my a. So I'm going to have this graph. That tells us a lot. So at -3, -5, we're going down. And we have a parabola that looks similar to that one. So that's your vertex form. Let's talk about the standard form. It does require a little bit more work. So I'm going to go ahead and erase our vertex form information so we can put some strictly standard form vertex information. No more opposite HK unless you want to complete the square and do all that business. Instead, I'm going to teach you a formula. So there is a formula to find vertex if it is in standard form. What you're going to do is you're going to take -b over 2a. Now what that gives you is your x value, or your h to fit what we talked about a second ago. Now if you have an x value, we can evaluate this function to find the y that goes with it by simply taking that x and plugging it back in. So the way that's typically written is f of -b over 2a. And that's going to represent your y value. But I want to go ahead and add that you plug in x to find y. So let's do an example of that. This one is going to be in standard form. Let's do f of x equals 2x squared minus 8x plus 3. First things first, is this parabola open up or opening down? What do you think? Well, look at a. A this time is 2, positive 2. So that tells me that this is going to be a graph parabola shaped like that. And what I'm about to find, your vertex, is down low. Think about that when you start, because that helps you when you get to your graphing part. Now if I'm asked to find the vertex, or in this case, the minimum, let's use this formula, -b over 2a, to do so. So my x is equal to -b over 2a. A is 2, b is -8. I don't need the 3 just yet. So, negative a. What happens when you have a double negative? It's going to be positive, right? So make sure you watch out for that double negative sign. It does happen. -8 is going to leave +8. 2 times my a, which is 2, becomes 4. So I have 8 divided by 4, which gives me a value of 2. In this vertex, x is 2. But I'm not done yet. I also have to find the y that goes with it. So we plug in x to find y. My x is 2. So y is equal to 2 times 2 squared minus 8 times 2 plus 3. I replace both the x's in this formula with 2's because that was my x. And let's see what we get here. 2 squared is 4. 2 times 4, kind of breaking it down. -8 and 2 would be -16 plus 3. We can go one more step here. That's 8. 8 minus 16 would be -8 plus 3. And finish that up. -8 plus 3 is -5. So my y value that goes with the x value of 2 is -5. And now I have a vertex, or a minimum point in this case. The last thing that you might be asked about is what's called an axis of symmetry. So I'm going to add just one more note. Axis of symmetry is the line that cuts your graphs down the middle. So if you have this shape, it'd look like that. Or if you have this shape, it'd look like that. Symmetry on both sides. What I hope that you notice is that